The rushing waters of the Carson River nearly claimed Josephine Zellweger's life in the spring of 1878, her desperate hands clawing at the swollen currents as her strength ebbed away with each passing second. Just as the murky depths threatened to pull her under one final time, a powerful arm locked around her waist, yanking her from death's cold grasp and into the warm security of a stranger's embrace, a rugged cowboy whose promise of calmer waters would change the course of her life forever. Josephine had never imagined herself in such dire circumstances. As the only daughter of a respected Philadelphia banker, her journey west had been meticulously planned, or so she thought. The stagecoach meant to carry her to her new teaching position in Tonopah, Nevada, had overturned at a river crossing after heavy spring rains had transformed the normally placid Carson River into a raging torrent. "You're safe now, madam," said the cowboy who'd plucked her from the river, his voice as steady as his grip as he carried her to the shore. Water streamed from her sodden dress and hair, but all she could focus on was the face of her rescuer's son, bronzed skin, startling blue eyes, and a jawline that could have been carved from stone. Thank you," Josephine managed between chattering teeth. "I was certain I would drown." "Xavier Galloway," he said simply, setting her down gently on dry ground. "And I don't make a habit of letting pretty ladies wash away on my watch." Josephine wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly aware of how her wet clothing clung to her slender frame. "Josephine Zellweger," she replied, trying to maintain some semblance of dignity despite her bedraggled appearance. Xavier shrugged out of his duster and draped it around her shoulders. "You picked one hell of a day to cross the Carson, Miss Zellweger." "I didn't exactly choose the timing," she said, her voice finding its strength as the initial shock began to fade. "The stagecoach, oh God, the others." Xavier gestured toward the riverbank where several other passengers huddled, equally drenched but alive. The stagecoach driver was cursing colorfully as he assessed the damage to his overturned vehicle, half submerged in the rushing water. "Everyone made it out," Xavier assured her, "though I reckon your luggage might be halfway to California by now." The realization that she'd lost everything, her clothes, her books, the letters of introduction for her new position, hit Josephine hard. She'd come west with such careful planning, such optimism, and now stood dripping on a riverbank with nothing but the clothes on her back. "I'm to be the new school teacher in Tonopah," she said, more to herself than to Xavier. "I was supposed to arrive tomorrow." Xavier studied her for a moment, water dripping from the brim of his hat. "Well, Miss Zellweger, looks like fate had other plans. Tonopah's still a good 2 days' ride from here, and that's in fair weather." "What am I to do?" The question escaped before she could contain it, her usual self-reliance momentarily shaken. Xavier glanced at the sky where dark clouds continued to gather. "First things first, we need to get you somewhere dry before nightfall. My ranch isn't far, about an hour's ride. You and the others can stay there until arrangements can be made." Josephine hesitated, keenly aware that accepting his offer meant putting herself in the hands of a stranger. Yet as thunder rumbled in the distance, she knew there were few alternatives. "That's very kind of you, Mr. Galloway." "Xavier," he corrected, the hint of a smile touching his lips. "Out here, formalities don't mean much when you've just fished someone from a river." Within the hour, Xavier had organized the bedraggled group. His ranch hands, who'd been working nearby when the stagecoach overturned, helped the other passengers onto horses. Josephine found herself seated in front of Xavier on his sturdy chestnut gelding, acutely conscious of his arm around her waist as they rode. "My father would be scandalized," she murmured, attempting to make light of their proximity. Xavier chuckled, the sound vibrating against her back. "I promise you calmer waters from here on out, Miss Zellweger, though I can't guarantee your father would approve of any of it." The Galloway Ranch came into view as they crested a hill, a sprawling main house of hewn timber, several outbuildings, and corrals filled with horses. It wasn't the rough cabin Josephine had imagined, but a proper establishment that spoke of prosperity and permanence. "Welcome to Silvercreek," Xavier said as they approached. "It's not Philadelphia, but it's home." Josephine was ushered inside by a housekeeper, a kindly Mexican woman named Rosa who clucked sympathetically at Josephine's condition and promptly led her upstairs to a guest room. "Señor Xavier, he is good man," Rosa said as she helped Josephine out of her wet clothes. "You are safe here." Left alone with a promise of hot food and borrowed clothing, Josephine stood by the window, watching as Xavier directed his men to care for the other passengers. There was an easy confidence to him, an air of authority that seemed natural rather than forced. He glanced up, catching her watching, and tipped his hat with a small smile that sent an unexpected warmth through her despite her state. By evening, Josephine was dressed in a simple but clean dress belonging to Xavier's sister, who apparently visited occasionally from Denver. The other passengers, a middle-aged couple returning to their ranch near Tonopah, a young man headed to work in the silver mines, and an elderly gentleman traveling to visit his daughter, were similarly outfitted in borrowed clothes and gathered in the dining room. Xavier presided over the meal with unexpected grace for a man who spent his days on horseback. He was clearly educated, Josephine noted, listening to him discuss recent territorial politics with the elderly gentleman. "So, Miss Zellweger," Xavier said, turning his attention to her as the meal progressed. "What brings a Philadelphia lady all the way to Tonopah to teach?" All eyes turned to her, and Josephine straightened slightly. "Adventure in part," she admitted, "and necessity. My father's investments suffered in the panic last year. Teaching has always been my passion, but now it's also my means of independence." "Brave woman," commented Mrs. Miller, the rancher's wife. "Tonopah's no place for the faint of heart." "It's growing," countered her husband. "The silver strikes have brought all sorts. They need civilizing influences." Xavier's gaze remained on Josephine. "And are you a civilizing influence, Miss Zellweger?" There was something in his tone, not quite mockery, but a challenge that made her meet his eyes directly. "I believe education is the foundation of civilization, Mr. Galloway, even in territories where men still settle disputes with six-shooters." A smile tugged at his lips. "Fair enough. Though you might find the children of miners and ranchers have different needs than Philadelphia society youngsters." "Children are children," Josephine replied. "They all need someone to believe in their potential." Something shifted in Xavier's expression, a flash of respect, perhaps before he turned to address another guest's question. Later that evening, as the others retired to their rooms, Josephine found herself unable to sleep. The events of the day kept replaying in her mind: the terror of the water closing over her head, the strong arm that had pulled her to safety. She wrapped a borrowed shawl around her shoulders and made her way downstairs, thinking a cup of tea might settle her nerves. She found Xavier in the study, poring over ledgers by lamplight. "I'm sorry," she said, pausing in the doorway. "I didn't mean to disturb you." He looked up, closing the book. "Not at all, cannot sleep. Every time I close my eyes, I feel like I'm drowning again," she admitted. Xavier nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Near death has a way of lingering. Come in, sit. I was just about to pour myself a drink. Would you care for one?" Josephine hesitated only briefly before entering the warmly lit room. "Perhaps just a small one." He poured amber liquid into 2 glasses, handing one to her. "To surviving," he said, raising his glass. "To unexpected rescues," she countered, taking a small sip that burned pleasantly down her throat. "So," Xavier said, settling into an armchair across from her. "Tell me about the life you left behind in Philadelphia." "There's not much to tell that would interest a rancher," she said with a small smile. "I attended teachers' college, assisted at my father's bank, participated in the expected social functions." "And yet you left it all to come to Nevada territory." Josephine traced the rim of her glass. "As I said, circumstances changed, but truthfully, I'd been restless for some time. My mother died when I was 16, and afterward, the life mapped out for me: marriage to a suitable man, running a household, the endless round of teas and charity committees. It all seemed insufficient. So you chose the wild frontier instead." There was that hint of challenge in his voice again. "I chose purpose," she corrected him. "Teaching isn't just a respectable occupation for a woman without marriage prospects. It's what I've always wanted to do." Xavier studied her for a long moment. "You're not what I expected, Josephine Zellweger." "Oh." And what did you expect when you pulled me from the river today? A frightened Eastern lady who'd be on the first stage coach back to civilization, he admitted. Not someone determined to face Tanapa despite nearly dying en route. Disappointment must be a common occurrence for you then, she replied, surprising herself with her boldness. Xavier laughed, the sound rich and genuine. On the contrary, I find myself increasingly intrigued. The way he said the word sent a flutter through Josephine's stomach that had nothing to do with the whiskey. She set her glass down, suddenly aware of the impropriety of their situation alone together in the late hours, sharing drinks and confidences. I should return to my room, she said, rising. Thank you for the drink and for everything you've done today. Xavier stood as well. The storm's likely to keep us all here tomorrow. The river needs time to recede before travel is safe. Of course, Josephine nodded. Good night, Mr. Galloway. Xavier, he reminded her as she reached the door. Sweet dreams, Josephine. No more drowning. Morning brought sunshine streaming through the windows and the smell of coffee and bacon wafting up the stairs. Josephine dressed in the borrowed clothing, pinning her hair as neatly as possible without her usual implements, and made her way downstairs. She found Xavier on the porch, speaking with a ranch hand. He turned as she approached, and something in his expression made her breath catch a flicker of appreciation that was quickly masked by polite greeting. Good morning, he said. I hope you slept well. Better than expected, she admitted, though I'm anxious about reaching Tanapa. They're expecting me. I've sent word with one of my men, Xavier explained. He left at first light to notify the town council that you're safe but delayed. The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched her. Thank you, that's very considerate. Breakfast is ready, he said, gesturing toward the house. We can discuss options afterward. Over breakfast, it became clear that the storm had indeed caused significant damage. The road to Tanapa was washed out in several places, and the stagecoach would need extensive repairs. It could be several days, maybe a week, before travel is possible, Xavier explained to the assembled passengers. You're all welcome to stay, of course, but I understand if you're eager to reach your destinations. Mr. Miller spoke up. If you could spare a wagon, Xavier, Martha and I could make our way cross-country. We know these lands well enough. The young miner, James, opted to ride with Xavier's messenger when he returned, willing to take his chances on horseback. The elderly gentleman, Mr. Patterson, decided to stay until proper transportation could be arranged. And you, Miss Zellweger? Xavier asked, his eyes holding hers across the table. Before she could answer, Rosa entered with a telegram. This just come for you, senor. Xavier read it quickly, his expression darkening. It seems I need to ride to Carson City immediately. Business matter. How long will you be gone? Asked Mrs. Miller. 2 days, if the roads allow. He glanced at Josephine. Miss Zellweger, I'd offer to escort you to Tanapa myself upon my return, if you're willing to wait. Josephine considered her options. She had no horse, no suitable traveling clothes, and limited knowledge of the territory. That would be most appreciated, Mr. Galloway. An hour later, Xavier was preparing to depart. Josephine found him in the stable, tightening his saddle. I wanted to thank you again, she said, watching as he efficiently checked his gear, and to apologize for the inconvenience my presence causes. Xavier paused, turning to face her. You're no inconvenience, Josephine. Rosa will see to anything you need while I'm gone. Make yourself at home. I'll try not to drown in anything while you're away, she said lightly. He stepped closer, his expression serious. Yesterday, when I pulled you from the river, I made a promise calmer waters. I meant it. The West can be harsh, but it has its own kind of peace once you learn its rhythms. The intensity in his blue eyes made Josephine's heart quicken. I look forward to discovering that for myself. I'll be back soon, he said, his voice softening. Then, with a fluid motion that spoke of years in the saddle, he mounted his horse and rode away, leaving Josephine with an odd sense of loss despite having known him less than a day. The next 2 days passed slowly. Josephine helped Rosa with household tasks, explored the ranch buildings under the watchful eye of Hank, Xavier's foreman, and spent hours reading books from Xavier's surprisingly extensive library. She found volumes of poetry, history, and science that suggested a mind far more cultured than the average rancher's. On the afternoon of the second day, she discovered a small journal tucked between larger books. Opening it, she realized it contained sketches, horses, landscapes, and occasionally people, all drawn with surprising skill. Several pages in, she found a loose sketch of a woman by a river, her hair wild around her face, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and determination. With a start, Josephine recognized herself, depicted in the moment Xavier had pulled her from the water. "He draws when he thinks," came Rosa's voice from the doorway, making Josephine jump guiltily. "Since he was a boy." "I didn't mean to pry," Josephine said, carefully replacing the journal. Rosa shrugged. "Is not private if he leaves in library." Her dark eyes assessed Josephine shrewdly. "You are not what he expected." "So he mentioned," Josephine replied, curious. "Senor Xavier, he helps many people, but he does not draw them." Rosa's meaning was clear, though unspoken. "Come. Dinner is ready and rain is coming again." That night, the storm returned with a vengeance. Wind rattled the windows and lightning illuminated the room in stark flashes. Josephine lay awake, wondering if Xavier was caught in the deluge, perhaps forced to seek shelter on his journey home. A particularly loud crash of thunder made her sit up in bed. Then she heard the sound of the front door opening, followed by voices downstairs. Relief washed over her at the realization that Xavier had returned safely. Unable to resist, she slipped from bed, wrapping the shawl around her nightdress and moved to the top of the stairs. From there, she could see Xavier shrugging out of his wet coat, his hair plastered to his head. "Rough night to be riding," came Mr. Patterson's voice from the parlor doorway. "Had no choice," Xavier replied, his voice tight with what sounded like anger. "Carson City Bank is calling in loans early. The whole territory's going to feel the squeeze. Yours too, some, I'll manage." Xavier ran a hand through his wet hair. "But smaller outfits won't." "It's a land grab, pure and simple." "Banks," Mr. Patterson said with disgust. "No offense to your houseguest's father." Xavier looked up then, catching sight of Josephine on the stairs. Their eyes met in the dim light and his expression softened. "None taken, I'm sure." "If you'll excuse me, gentlemen." He climbed the stairs slowly, stopping a few steps below where Josephine stood. "You're awake," he observed quietly. "The storm," she explained, "and I heard you return. I was concerned." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Were you now?" "It would be rather inconvenient if my escort to Tanapa were washed away in a flash flood," she said primly, though her eyes betrayed her attempt at lightness. "Is that all?" he asked, climbing another step. He was close enough now that she could see droplets of rain still clinging to his eyelashes. "You spoke of banks," she said, changing the subject. "Is there trouble?" Xavier's expression darkened momentarily. "Nothing for you to worry about." "But yes, there's always trouble when men in offices far away make decisions about land they've never seen." "My father is a banker," she reminded him. "And is he the sort to foreclose on families to expand his own interests?" Josephine considered this. "No, he believes in fair dealings." "It's why his bank survived the panic when others failed." Xavier studied her face. "Then perhaps it's not banking that's the problem, but the men who wield its power." Another step closer. "You should get some sleep, Josephine. Tomorrow, if the weather clears, we'll start for Tanapa." Something like disappointment flickered through her. Of course, that had been the plan all along, to get her to her destination, to the life that awaited her. Yet in just these few days, the prospect had somehow lost some of its luster. "Yes, of course," she said. "Good night, Xavier." He caught her hand as she turned, the touch sending warmth up her arm. "Josephine," he said, his voice low. "I'm glad you're still here." Before she could respond, he released her hand and continued up the stairs past her, leaving her with a racing heart and confused thoughts. Morning broke clear and bright, the storm having spent its fury overnight. Josephine dressed carefully in the clothes Mrs. Miller had left behind, a practical riding skirt and blouse that would serve better for travel than the borrowed dress. Downstairs, she found Xavier and Hank discussing arrangements for the journey. "We'll take the south route," Xavier was saying. "It's longer but higher ground, less likely to be washed out." 2 days at least," Hank replied, glancing at Josephine as she entered. Xavier turned, his eyes taking in her appearance. "Good morning. I see you found suitable traveling clothes." Mrs. Miller was kind enough to leave them, Josephine confirmed. Are we leaving today then? Xavier nodded. Within the hour, if that suits you. The roads won't improve by waiting. Preparations moved quickly after that. Mr. Patterson would remain at the ranch until the regular stagecoach service resumed. Rosa packed provisions for the journey, and Xavier selected horses, a gentle bay mare for Josephine and his own sturdy gelding. Have you ridden before? Xavier asked as he adjusted the stirrups for her. In Philadelphia parks, yes, Josephine admitted. Though I suspect Western riding is somewhat different. He smiled, the first real smile she'd seen since his return. Daisy here will take good care of you. She's steady as they come. Their departure was without ceremony. Josephine thanked Rosa for her hospitality, bid farewell to Mr. Patterson, and found herself riding beside Xavier down the long drive that led away from Silvercreek Ranch. It's beautiful, she said, looking back at the property nestled against the mountains. You've built something remarkable here. My father started it, Xavier explained. I expanded after the war. You fought, she asked, realizing how little she knew about him. He nodded, his eyes on the horizon. Union cavalry came back to find my father dead and the ranch struggling. Took some years to rebuild. And now the banks threaten that again, she said, remembering his words from the night before. Xavier glanced at her sharply. You heard more than I realized. I don't mean to pry. No, it's fine. He adjusted his hat against the morning sun. Carson City National is being purchased by Eastern interests. The new owners want to consolidate holdings in the territory, which means pressuring smaller ranchers to sell by calling in loans early. That's unethical, Josephine said, frowning. It's business, Xavier replied with a shrug. And it's why the West remains wild, Miss Zellweger. The law exists, but money often speaks louder. They rode in silence for a time, the rhythm of the horses' hooves a steady backdrop to Josephine's thoughts. She'd come west with such idealistic notions, bringing education and refinement to a frontier town. Now she wondered if her Eastern perspective might be as unwelcome as those bankers' tactics. You're quiet, Xavier observed as they paused to water the horses at a small stream. Josephine smiled wryly. Just contemplating whether I'm bringing something needed to Tanapa or merely imposing Eastern ideas where they don't belong. Xavier considered this as he refilled their canteens. Education is never an imposition, he said finally, but adaptation is necessary. The children you'll teach need to understand both worlds, the refinement of the East and the practical realities of the West. And do you navigate both worlds, Mr. Galloway? She asked, noticing the way his cultured speech occasionally slipped into frontier directness. He handed her a filled canteen, their fingers brushing. I try. My mother insisted I attend university back east. My father thought it was nonsense for a rancher's son. And what did you think? That knowledge is never wasted, he said, his blue eyes holding hers. Even if its application isn't immediately obvious. They continued their journey through country more rugged than Josephine had imagined. Xavier pointed out landmarks and explained the territory's features, his knowledge of the land revealing a deep connection to this place. By late afternoon, dark clouds were gathering again in the distance. We'll stop at Willow Creek Station for the night, Xavier decided, pointing to what appeared to be just another fold in the landscape to Josephine's untrained eye. It's a relay station for the stage line basic, but dry. An hour later, they rode into a small compound consisting of a main building, stables, and a corral. A weathered man with a gray beard emerged at the sound of their approach. Xavier Galloway, he called in greeting. Twice in 1 month, I'm honored. Hello, Finn, Xavier replied, dismounting and helping Josephine down from her horse. Need lodging for the night. This is Miss Josephine Zellweger, bound for Tanapa. Finn's bushy eyebrows rose as he assessed Josephine. Madam, he said with a nod, got one private room you can have. Xavier can bunk with the other travelers. The station proved to be a simple but clean establishment that served as both way station for travelers and gathering place for the scattered ranchers and miners of the region. By dinner time, the main room was filled with an eclectic group, 2 miners headed for the silver fields, a cattle buyer from California, and a young woman who, to Josephine's surprise, wore men's clothing and introduced herself as Dr. Sarah Coleman. "You're a physician?" Josephine asked, unable to hide her curiosity. Sarah nodded, spooning stew into her mouth. "Graduated from Women's Medical College in Philadelphia. You know it, of course," Josephine said, delighted at this unexpected connection. "My aunt serves on its board." "Small world," Sarah commented. "I'm headed to Tanapa myself. They need a doctor, and unlike most mining towns, they're progressive enough to consider a woman for the position." Josephine felt a surge of relief at the prospect of female companionship in her new home. "I'm to be the school teacher there." "Then we'll be colleagues of a sort," Sarah said with a smile. "Civilizing the frontier, one mind and body at a time." Xavier, who had been deep in conversation with the cattle buyer, glanced over at their exchange. Something in his expression, pride, perhaps, warmed Josephine. After dinner, as the other travelers played cards or shared stories, Josephine stepped outside for some air. The night was clear now, stars strewn across the vast Nevada sky in patterns more brilliant than she'd ever witnessed in Philadelphia. "Different from city skies, isn't it?" Came Xavier's voice as he joined her on the porch. "Breathtaking," she agreed. "I've never seen so many stars. One of the West's better qualities," he said, leaning against the porch railing beside her. "You seem to hit it off with Dr. Coleman." Josephine nodded. "It's reassuring to know there will be another educated woman in Tanapa. Though I admit, her boldness in dress and manner surprises me." Xavier chuckled. "Out here, practicality often trumps convention. Hard to treat injured miners in a corset and bustle." The casual mention of women's undergarments made Josephine blush, thankful for the darkness that hid her reaction. "I suppose you're right. I may need to reconsider some of my own conventions." "You'll find your way," Xavier said, his voice softening. "You strike me as adaptable for all your Eastern refinement." "You make Eastern refinement sound like a disease," she teased. "Not at all, just an approach that sometimes needs adjustment to thrive in new environments." He turned to face her fully. "Like transplanting a rose to desert soil. Beautiful, but requiring different care." The comparison and the admiration implicit in it sent a flutter through Josephine's chest. "Are you calling me a rose, Mr. Galloway?" In the moonlight, his smile was devastatingly charming. "Would that be presumptuous of me?" Before Josephine could formulate a response that wouldn't reveal too much of her growing feelings, the station door opened, spilling light onto the porch. "Xavier," called Finn. "Got a message came in for you earlier. Nearly forgot with all the commotion." The moment broken, Xavier excused himself to read the telegram. Josephine remained on the porch, collecting her thoughts and trying to steady her pulse. When Xavier returned, his expression had hardened. "Problem at the ranch," he said tersely. "Nothing serious, but I'll need to handle it after I get you to Tanapa." "Is there anything I can do?" she asked. He shook his head. "Bank business, just more of the same." He hesitated, then added, "We should turn in. Early start tomorrow if we're to reach Tanapa by nightfall." The abrupt shift in his demeanor left Josephine feeling as though a door had closed between them. She bid him good night and retired to her small room, wondering what the telegram had contained to transform the warm, attentive man into this distant figure so quickly. Morning came with a bustle of activity as travelers prepared to depart in various directions. Josephine found Xavier already saddling their horses, his movements efficient but tense. "Good morning," she ventured. "I hope you slept well." "Well enough," he replied without looking up. "We'll make better time today. Dr. Coleman will be joining us, if that's acceptable. She's hired a horse from Finn." The addition of Sarah to their party changed the dynamic of the journey. Where the previous day had been filled with private conversations and growing connection, today's ride featured Sarah's enthusiastic observations about the territory and her plans for establishing a proper medical practice in Tanapa. Josephine was grateful for the other woman's company, yet couldn't help feeling a loss at Xavier's continued reserve. He rode slightly ahead, alert to their surroundings but offering little beyond practical advice about the trail. By mid-afternoon, the landscape began to change. The terrain grew more rugged, with evidence of mining operations visible in the distance. Xavier pointed out a plume of dust on the horizon. "Tanapa," he said. We'll be there within 2 hours. Josephine felt a curious mixture of anticipation and regret. Her new life awaited the position she'd traveled so far to accept, the purpose she'd sought. Yet the prospect of parting from Xavier left an unexpected hollow feeling in her chest. As they approached the outskirts of town, signs of civilization became more frequent. They passed small homesteads, then larger operations, and finally joined a proper road leading to Tanapa itself. The town was larger than Josephine had expected, several streets of substantial buildings, including a brick hotel, a bank, numerous saloons, and various businesses. Men in mining clothes mingled with merchants and townspeople. A group of children played in front of a white clapboard building that Josephine assumed was the school. "Town's booming," Xavier commented, the most he'd spoken in hours. Silver strikes last year brought in fresh capital and new settlers. They drew attention as they rode down the main street, particularly Sarah in her practical but unconventional attire. Xavier led them to a 2-story building with a sign identifying it as the Tanapa Hotel. "This is where arrangements were made for you," he explained, dismounting and helping Josephine from her horse. "The town council will want to meet you both, but that can wait until tomorrow." As if summoned by his words, a portly man in a formal suit hurried toward them from the direction of the bank. "Mr. Galloway, we weren't expecting you." His eyes moved to the women. "Ah, this must be our new schoolteacher and physician. Welcome, welcome to Tanapa." Introductions were made to Mr. Hargrove, chairman of the town council and owner of the bank. He insisted on escorting them personally into the hotel, assuring them that accommodations had been prepared, and that a town meeting was already scheduled for the following evening to introduce them to the community. Throughout the flurry of activity, Xavier remained politely distant, handling their luggage, minimal as it was, given the circumstances of Josephine's arrival, and arranging for the care of the horses. Finally, as Josephine stood in the lobby preparing to follow the hotel proprietor to her room, she found a moment alone with Xavier. "I don't know how to thank you properly," she said, aware of the inadequacy of the words. "You saved my life and then ensured I reached my destination safely." Xavier's reserved expression softened slightly. "No thanks needed, Miss Zellweger. I promised you calmer waters, and Tanapa is certainly calmer than the Carson River in flood. Will you be returning to your ranch immediately?" she asked, trying to keep disappointment from her voice. "First thing tomorrow," he confirmed. "That business I mentioned needs attention." "Of course." Josephine hesitated, then extended her hand. "Then I wish you safe travels, Mr. Galloway." He took her hand, but instead of shaking it, he raised it to his lips in a gesture so unexpectedly gallant that Josephine felt her breath catch. "It's been my privilege, Josephine," he said quietly. "I hope Tanapa proves worthy of you." Before she could respond, he released her hand and nodded to the waiting proprietor. "Anderson here will see to anything you need. Good evening." And with that, he was gone, striding out of the hotel with the same purposeful gait that had carried him into her life just days before. Josephine's first weeks in Tanapa passed in a blur of activity. The town welcomed both her and Dr. Coleman with enthusiasm, grateful for their services, and surprisingly accepting of 2 unmarried professional women establishing themselves in the frontier community. The school proved to be better equipped than Josephine had anticipated, with proper desks, a decent selection of books, and 27 students ranging from 6 to 16 years of age. The children, while less formally educated than their Eastern counterparts, showed a practical intelligence and eagerness to learn that Josephine found refreshing. She found lodging with a respectable widow, Mrs. Henderson, whose home was just a short walk from the school. Sarah took rooms above her newly established medical office, and the 2 women often shared meals and compared notes on their experiences. "Have you heard anything from your cowboy rescuer?" Sarah asked one evening as they dined at Tanapa's only restaurant that welcomed unescorted ladies. "He's not my anything," Josephine replied, though the question sent an unwelcome pang through her chest. "And no, I haven't. I don't expect to." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "The way he looked at you suggested otherwise," Josephine sighed. Whatever might have been developing was clearly cut short by some business matter. He received a telegram that changed everything. "Men and their business," Sarah said with a dismissive wave, "always prioritizing commerce over connection." "That's unfair," Josephine found herself defending Xavier. "He has responsibilities, a ranch to run, people who depend on him. And you've developed quite an understanding of him in your short acquaintance," Sarah observed shrewdly. Before Josephine could formulate a response that wouldn't reveal the depth of her feelings, their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Mr. Hargrove. "Ladies, good evening," he greeted them, tipping his hat. "I hope you're finding Tanapa to your liking." "Very much so," Josephine assured him. "The school is coming along nicely, and the children are making excellent progress. And my patients seem relieved to have a doctor who doesn't prescribe whiskey for every ailment," Sarah added with a smile. Hargrove beamed at them. "Excellent, excellent. The town council is most pleased with your contributions already." He hesitated, then added, "Miss Zellweger, I wonder if I might have a word with you about a private matter." Sarah excused herself tactfully, leaving Josephine alone with the banker. "What can I help you with, Mr. Hargrove?" Josephine asked. Hargrove settled into the vacated chair, looking suddenly uncomfortable. "It's a delicate matter. I understand you became acquainted with Xavier Galloway under rather dramatic circumstances." Josephine's pulse quickened at the mention of Xavier's name. "Yes, he saved my life when the stagecoach overturned. Why do you ask?" Hargrove fidgeted with his watch chain. "I've received some concerning reports about Mr. Galloway's financial situation. As you may know, my bank has recently been acquired by Eastern Interests, the same ones pressuring smaller ranchers by calling in loans early." Josephine interrupted, remembering Xavier's words. Hargrove looked startled. "He discussed this with you, in general terms," she admitted. "He seemed concerned about the implications for the territory." "Yes, well." Hargrove cleared his throat. "The fact is, Miss Zellweger, that Mr. Galloway has been organizing resistance among the ranchers. He's encouraging them to refuse compliance with perfectly legal loan adjustments." Josephine considered this information. It explained Xavier's sudden change after receiving the telegram, his need to return to his ranch quickly. "And why are you telling me this, Mr. Hargrove? I thought perhaps, given your father's position in banking and your acquaintance with Galloway, you might be willing to speak with him. Help him see reason before his actions damage his standing in the community." The presumption behind the request, that she would use whatever influence she might have with Xavier to advance the bank's interests, struck Josephine as both calculating and offensive. "Mr. Hargrove," she said carefully, "while I appreciate your concern, I barely know Mr. Galloway. And my father has always believed that banks exist to support communities, not to manipulate them for profit." Hargrove's expression hardened slightly. "I see. Well, it was merely a thought. I wouldn't want your position here to be complicated by associations with troublemakers." The implied threat was clear, and Josephine felt a surge of indignation. "Are you suggesting my employment depends on my personal connections?" "Not at all," Hargrove backtracked quickly. "Your position is secure, of course. I merely wish to spare you any unpleasantness should Mr. Galloway's activities result in legal consequences." Josephine stood, gathering her shawl. "Thank you for your concern, Mr. Hargrove. If you'll excuse me, I have lessons to prepare for tomorrow." As she walked back to Mrs. Henderson's house, Josephine's mind raced. Xavier was actively fighting against the bank's tactics she herself found ethically questionable. Yet Hargrove's veiled threat suggested the situation was escalating in ways that could be dangerous for all involved. For the next several days, Josephine found her thoughts repeatedly returning to Xavier and his circumstances. She threw herself into her teaching duties with renewed vigor, as if the extra effort could somehow distract her from worry about a man she barely knew yet couldn't seem to forget. Then, nearly a month after her arrival in Tanapa, Josephine was walking home from school when she spotted a familiar figure emerging from the bank. Xavier Galloway, looking grim-faced and tense, strode down the steps and toward his horse tied at the hitching post. Without considering the propriety of her actions, Josephine hurried across the street. Mr. Galloway, he turned at the sound of her voice, his stern expression softening immediately. Miss Zellweger, he said, removing his hat. You're looking well. Tanapa agrees with you, it seems. And you look. She paused, taking in the shadows beneath his eyes, the new lines of strain around his mouth. Troubled, a wry smile touched his lips. Observant as ever, he glanced around the busy street. I'd ask you to join me for coffee, but I'm not sure it would be wise, given the circumstances. Mr. Hargrove spoke to me, she admitted. About your disagreement with the bank. Xavier's expression darkened. Did he now? And did he ask you to use your feminine wiles to bring me to heel? The bitterness in his tone stung, but Josephine held her ground. Something like that. I declined the honor. Surprise flickered across Xavier's face, followed by a genuine smile that transformed his features. Did you indeed? That must have gone over well. About as well as you might expect, she replied, finding herself smiling in return despite the seriousness of the situation. Xavier, what's happening? Truly, he sighed, looking around once more before speaking in a lowered voice. The banking consortium isn't just calling in loans, they're manipulating water rights, pressuring the territorial legislature, even hiring men to intimidate ranchers who resist. It's gone beyond business to something much uglier. That's terrible, Josephine said, truly alarmed now. Is there nothing the law can do? The law moves slowly, and money talks loudly, Xavier replied grimly. We're organizing legal challenges, but in the meantime, families are losing land that's been theirs for generations. A commotion further down the street drew their attention, raised voices, then the unmistakable sound of a gunshot. Xavier instinctively moved in front of Josephine, his hand going to the pistol at his hip. People scattered as two men squared off in the middle of the street, one a rough-looking character in dusty clothes, the other a well-dressed man Josephine recognized as one of the bank's representatives. That's Morley Jenkins, Xavier muttered. Lost his ranch last week to the bank. And that's Arthur Blackwood, the consortium's enforcer. Before Josephine could respond, there was another shot. Jenkins staggered, clutching his shoulder as Blackwood advanced on him with pistol still raised. Without hesitation, Xavier stepped into the street. That's enough, Blackwood. The enforcer turned, his cold eyes assessing Xavier. This isn't your fight, Galloway. It became my fight when you started using guns instead of courts, Xavier replied evenly. Jenkins is wounded. Let him get medical attention, Blackwood sneered. Or what? You'll add assault on a bank representative to your growing list of troubles. By now, a crowd had gathered, including Sheriff Daniels, who moved cautiously toward the standoff. Put the gun down, Blackwood, the sheriff ordered. There'll be no more shooting in my town. For a tense moment, it seemed Blackwood might refuse. Then, with deliberate slowness, he holstered his weapon. This isn't over, he said to Xavier, not by a long shot. As the sheriff took control of the situation, Xavier turned back to Josephine, his expression grave. You should go home, Miss Zellweger. These streets aren't as safe as they once were. Because of men like Blackwood, she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Xavier nodded. Because powerful interests have decided this territory is theirs for the taking, regardless of who gets hurt. He hesitated, then added softly, I shouldn't have involved you in this conversation. It could complicate your position here. I'm already involved, Josephine replied, thinking of Hargrove's implied threat. At least now I understand the stakes more clearly. Xavier studied her face, something like admiration in his eyes. You continue to surprise me, Josephine Zellweger. As do you, Xavier Galloway. She glanced toward where Dr. Coleman was now tending to Jenkins' wound. Will you be staying in town? He shook his head. It's not safe for me here right now. I only came to meet with some of the smaller ranchers, try to coordinate our legal response. Disappointment washed over her, though she tried to hide it. Then take care on your journey home. Xavier took her hand, his touch sending that now familiar warmth through her. Josephine, he said quietly, I wish circumstances were different. The simple statement contained volumes of unspoken meaning. As do I, she replied. With a final squeeze of her hand, Xavier released her and mounted his horse. Until we meet again, he said with a tip of his hat, then rode away, leaving Josephine standing in the street with a heart full of conflicting emotions. The following weeks brought escalating tensions to Tanapa. The dispute between ranchers and the banking consortium dominated conversations, divided the community, and occasionally erupted in violence. Josephine continued her teaching duties, but found it increasingly difficult to remain neutral as she witnessed the effects on her students, some of whom came from families facing financial ruin. One afternoon, as Josephine was dismissing her class, she noticed a familiar horse tied outside Xavier's chestnut gelding. Her heart leapt at the sight, only to sink again as she realized the rider wasn't Xavier but his foreman, Hank. She approached him as he conversed with several local men. "Mr. Hank," she called, "is everything all right at Silvercreek?" Hank turned, recognition lighting his weathered face. "Miss Zellweger, good to see you again, madam." The other men drifted away, leaving them relatively private. "Is Xavier Mr. Galloway well?" She asked, unable to keep concern from her voice. Hank's expression grew serious. "That's actually why I'm here, madam. Xavier's been arrested." "Arrested?" Josephine gasped. "On what charges?" "Inciting civil unrest, they're calling it," Hank replied bitterly. "It's nonsense, of course." He was organizing a legal meeting of ranchers to discuss their rights, but Blackwood and his men claimed it was a conspiracy against the banks. "Where is he being held?" Josephine demanded. "Carson City Jail. The territorial judge arrives next week for his hearing." Hank hesitated. "Xavier asked me to bring you this." He handed her a folded letter. Josephine took it with trembling fingers. "Thank you. Is there anything I can do to help?" "We're gathering character witnesses, people who can testify to Xavier's good standing and peaceable intentions," Hank explained. "I thought, given your position in the community and your acquaintance with him, your word might carry weight." "Of course," Josephine said immediately. "I'll do whatever I can." After Hank left, Josephine hurried to the privacy of her room to read Xavier's letter. His handwriting was strong and clear, much like the man himself. "Josephine, I find myself in an unexpected situation, though perhaps not entirely surprising given recent events. I want to assure you that the charges against me are fabricated, a desperate attempt by Blackwood and his employers to silence legitimate opposition to their tactics. I regret that our acquaintance has been so frequently interrupted by circumstances beyond our control. From the moment I pulled you from the Carson River, I have felt a connection to you that defies easy explanation. In you, I recognized a kindred spirit, someone of principle and courage, willing to leave behind the familiar to forge a new path. Should matters resolve favorably, I hope we might explore that connection further. If not, please know that meeting you has been one of the great privileges of my life, however brief our time together. I promised you calmer waters once. That promise still stands, though the journey to reach them may be more turbulent than either of us anticipated. Yours, Xavier. Josephine pressed the letter to her chest, emotions washing over her in waves. Without fully realizing her decision until it was made, she rose and began gathering essentials for a journey. Within an hour, she was at the livery stable, arranging to hire a horse. "You can't possibly be thinking of traveling to Carson City alone," Sarah exclaimed when Josephine informed her of her plans. "I'm not asking your permission, Sarah," Josephine replied calmly. "Xavier needs support, and I intend to provide it." Sarah studied her friend's determined face. "You love him," she said. It wasn't a question. Josephine didn't deny it. "I believe in his cause, and yes, I care for him more deeply than I can explain given the brevity of our acquaintance." Sarah sighed. "Then at least let me help you prepare properly." "And you're not going alone, I'll accompany you. Your patients can manage without me for a few days," Sarah interrupted. "Besides, a woman doctor might be useful if your cowboy has been mistreated in jail." Josephine felt a rush of gratitude for her friend's support. "Thank you, Sarah." By morning, they were on the road to Carson City, accompanied by Hank and 2 other ranch hands from Silvercreek. The journey took 2 days of hard riding, during which Josephine had ample time to consider the potential consequences of her actions. She might lose her position in Tanapa, damage her reputation, even put herself in danger. Yet each time doubt crept in, she remembered Xavier's words, a connection that defies easy explanation. She felt it too, had felt it from the moment he pulled her from the river. Carson City was larger and more established than Tonopah, with imposing government buildings that reflected its status as the territorial capital. The jail was a substantial stone structure adjacent to the courthouse. Their group attracted attention as they rode into town, particularly two women in the company of weathered ranch hands. Hank led them to a modest hotel where rooms had been secured, then to the office of the lawyer who had taken Xavier's case. Martin Whitaker was a surprisingly young man with intelligent eyes and a determined set to his jaw. He listened carefully as Josephine explained her connection to Xavier and her willingness to testify on his behalf. Character witnesses are important, Whitaker acknowledged. But what we really need is evidence that contradicts the prosecution's claim that Mr. Galloway was organizing violent resistance. What exactly are they alleging? Sarah asked. That he was stockpiling weapons and planning to intimidate bank representatives, Whitaker explained. Their star witness is a man named Turner who claims to have attended meetings where such plans were discussed. That's absurd, Hank growled. Turner was at exactly one meeting, and all we discussed was legal options for challenging the loan terms. Whitaker nodded. I believe you. But Turner's testimony, combined with Blackwood's influence, makes this a challenging case. Can I see him? Josephine asked quietly. The lawyer hesitated. Visitors are restricted, but he studied her for a moment. I could arrange it as a potential witness in his defense. An hour later, Josephine found herself being led through the jail to a small interview room. When Xavier was brought in, her heart contracted at the sight of him. He looked tired and somewhat disheveled, but his eyes lit up when he saw her. Josephine, he said, his voice conveying volumes of emotion. What are you doing here, supporting an innocent man? She replied, conscious of the guard standing nearby. And a cause I believe in. Xavier glanced at the guard, then back to her. You shouldn't have come. Your position in Tonopah is less important to me than justice, she interrupted. And less important than you. Something flashed in Xavier's eyes, hope, perhaps, or deeper feeling. Mr. Collins, he said to the guard, could we have a moment of privacy? Miss Zellweger is assisting with my legal defense. The guard hesitated, then nodded. 5 minutes, he said, stepping outside but leaving the door partially open. As soon as they were alone, Xavier reached across the table and took Josephine's hands in his. You're the most remarkable woman I've ever met, he said softly. Riding all this way, risking your reputation, I received your letter, she said. And I feel it too, Xavier, this connection between us, from the moment you pulled me from that river. I've thought of you every day since, he admitted. Wondered if you were happy in Tonopah, if you'd found your purpose there. I was finding my way, she said, until I realized that purpose means little without connection. She squeezed his hands. We're going to fight this, Xavier. Mr. Whitaker seems capable, and with truthful testimony, Blackwood doesn't care about truth, Xavier interrupted grimly. He cares about removing obstacles to his employer's plans, and right now I'm the biggest obstacle. Then we'll find a way to expose him, Josephine said with determination. There must be records, evidence of their underhanded tactics. Xavier studied her face, a slow smile spreading across his. You know, when I first met you, drenched and half drowned, I thought you were just another Eastern lady out of her depth in the West. I've never been so glad to be wrong. And I thought you were just a cowboy with a hero complex, she replied, matching his smile. We've both had our assumptions challenged. The guard's footsteps signaled the end of their privacy. Xavier quickly raised her hands to his lips. Whatever happens, he said urgently, know that meeting you has changed everything for me, Josephine. And for me, she whispered as the door opened. Over the next few days, Josephine threw herself into assisting with Xavier's defense. She met with potential witnesses, helped Whitaker prepare his arguments, and used her education and Eastern manners to gain access to territorial officials who might influence the proceedings. Sarah proved equally valuable, treating several ranch hands who had been injured in confrontations with Blackwood's men, and documenting their injuries as potential evidence of the consortium's tactics. The day before the hearing, Josephine was returning to the hotel when she noticed a familiar figure entering a saloon across the street. Turner, the man whose testimony threatened Xavier's freedom. On impulse, she crossed the street and entered the establishment, ignoring the stares her presence provoked in what was clearly a men's domain. Turner sat alone at a corner table, nursing a whiskey and looking decidedly uncomfortable. Josephine approached directly. "Mr. Turner," she said, seating herself across from him without invitation. "My name is Josephine Zellweger." He eyed her warily. "What do you want, lady?" "I want to understand why you're lying about Xavier Galloway," she said bluntly. Turner flinched, glancing around nervously. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I think you do," Josephine persisted. "I think you know exactly what was discussed at that meeting, and it had nothing to do with violence or intimidation." Turner took a long swallow of whiskey. "Look, lady, you don't understand how things work around here." "Then explain it to me," she challenged. For a moment she thought he might refuse. Then with a defeated sigh he leaned forward. "Blackwood has something on everyone. With me, it's a gambling debt I can't pay. With others, it's land deeds or family secrets or just plain threats." "So you're lying to save yourself," Josephine said, unable to keep disappointment from her voice. Turner flushed. "What would you have done? Galloway's just one man. He can't stop what's coming." "What if he's not alone?" Josephine asked. "What if enough people stand together against Blackwood and his employers?" Turner shook his head. "Nice thought, lady, but this territory runs on money and power. Always has." "Not always," Josephine countered. "Sometimes it runs on truth and courage." "You have a chance to show both tomorrow, Mr. Turner." She left him with that thought, hoping she'd planted a seed that might bloom into honesty when it mattered most. The courthouse was packed the following morning. Ranchers, townspeople, bank representatives, and curious onlookers filled the benches as the territorial judge, a stern-faced man named Hollister, called the proceedings to order. Xavier sat beside Whitaker at the defense table, his bearing proud despite the circumstances. He caught Josephine's eye as she took her seat in the front row, giving her a small, grateful smile. The prosecution presented its case first, a straightforward narrative painting Xavier as a dangerous agitator, stirring up violence against legitimate business interests. Blackwood testified smoothly, his carefully crafted lies sounding plausible to those who didn't know better. When Turner was called, Josephine held her breath. The man looked haggard, his eyes darting between Blackwood and Xavier as he took the oath. "Mr. Turner," the prosecutor began, "please tell the court what you witnessed at the meeting held at Silvercreek Ranch 3 weeks ago." Turner swallowed visibly, then looked directly at the judge. "I witnessed ranchers discussing legal options for challenging loan terms," he said clearly. "There was no talk of violence, no plans for intimidation, despite what I previously told Mr. Blackwood." A murmur ran through the courtroom. The prosecutor looked stunned. "Mr. Turner, this contradicts your sworn statement." "Yes, sir, it does," Turner agreed. "Because my sworn statement was a lie, given under duress and threat from Mr. Blackwood." Chaos erupted in the courtroom. The judge banged his gavel repeatedly, demanding order. Blackwood half rose from his seat, his face contorted with fury, before his own lawyer pulled him back down. When order was finally restored, Whitaker moved quickly, calling witness after witness to corroborate Turner's revised testimony. Ranchers described the actual content of meetings Xavier had organized. A territorial legislator admitted being pressured by the banking consortium to fast-track favorable regulations. Even a former bank employee testified about questionable practices in loan modifications. Throughout it all, Xavier remained composed, his eyes frequently finding Josephine's in the crowd. Each time their gazes met, she felt the connection between them strengthen, transcending the crowded courtroom and the serious circumstances. When Josephine took the stand as a character witness, she spoke eloquently of Xavier's integrity, his commitment to his community, and his belief in lawful means of resolving disputes. She described his rescue of her from the Carson River, his care for the stranded passengers, and his efforts to ensure her safe arrival in Tonopah despite personal difficulties. "In my observation, Your Honor," she concluded, Mr. Galloway is a man who saves people from troubled waters, not one who creates turbulence himself. By late afternoon, the momentum had clearly shifted. Judge Hollister, after hearing all testimony, delivered a stinging rebuke to the prosecution and ordered an immediate investigation into Blackwood's tactics. Xavier was released with all charges dismissed, and the courthouse erupted in cheers from the ranchers and their supporters. Outside, as the crowd dispersed, Xavier found Josephine waiting on the courthouse steps. "You were magnificent," he said, taking her hands in his. "All of you," he added, acknowledging Sarah, Hank, and the others who had supported his defense. "Truth has a power of its own," Josephine replied. "We just helped it find a voice." Xavier glanced around at the gathering dusk. "I need to speak with you privately," he said softly. "Will you walk with me?" They strolled to a small park near the courthouse, the evening air cool and fragrant with pine. When they found a secluded bench, Xavier turned to face Josephine fully. "I've had a lot of time to think in that jail cell," he began, "about what matters, about what I want for my future." Josephine's heart quickened. "And what conclusions did you reach?" "That life is too precious and too uncertain to waste a moment of it," he said, his blue eyes intent on hers. "When I pulled you from that river, something changed for me, Josephine. It was as if fate put you directly in my path, and every moment since has only confirmed what I felt even then." "Which was?" she asked, barely breathing. "That you are extraordinary," he said simply. "Brave, principled, intelligent, everything I never knew I was looking for until I found you." "Xavier," Josephine began, but he raised a hand gently. "Please let me finish. I know this is sudden, unconventional even. We've known each other such a short time under such unusual circumstances, but I've lived enough to recognize something rare when I find it." He took both her hands in his. "I'm in love with you, Josephine Zellweger. Completely, irrevocably in love with you." Joy bubbled up within her, bright and unstoppable. "And I love you," she replied, the words coming easily, naturally. "I think I began falling the moment you promised me calmer waters." Xavier's smile was radiant in the fading light. "I know your position in Tanapa is important to you. I would never ask you to give up the purpose that brought you west." "What are you suggesting?" "A compromise," he said. "Silvercreek is a day's ride from Tanapa. Not convenient for daily commuting, but not impossible for weekends and holidays. At least until the school year ends." Josephine considered this. "And after that," Xavier's expression grew serious. "After that, I was hoping you might consider becoming my wife, making Silvercreek your home. Perhaps even starting a school there for the children of our ranch hands and neighboring properties." "Your wife," Josephine repeated, testing the word and finding it felt right. "You're proposing marriage, Xavier Galloway." "I am," he confirmed, a hint of nervousness finally showing through his confident exterior. "I know it's fast, perhaps even foolhardy by Eastern standards." Josephine stopped his words with a finger to his lips. "I didn't come west to cling to Eastern standards," she said softly. "I came to find a new life, one with purpose and meaning. I believe I've found that with you." "Is that a yes?" he asked, hope lighting his eyes. "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you, Xavier." His kiss was gentle at first, a tender meeting of lips that quickly deepened as they gave themselves to the emotions they'd held in check for so long. When they finally parted, both breathless, Xavier rested his forehead against hers. "I promised you calmer waters," he murmured. "I intend to keep that promise for the rest of our lives." 2 months later, Josephine stood on the porch of the main house at Silvercreek Ranch, watching as the last guests from their wedding celebration departed. The day had been perfect, a simple ceremony in the garden, attended by friends from both Tanapa and the surrounding ranches. Sarah had been her maid of honor, Hank had stood as Xavier's best man, and even Mr. Patterson had traveled from his daughter's home for the occasion. Xavier joined her on the porch, slipping an arm around her waist. "Happy Mrs. Galloway," the name still sent a thrill through her. "Completely," she assured him, leaning into his embrace. "Though I'm still getting used to the idea that this is all ours to share." The future stretched before them, filled with possibilities. Josephine had completed her teaching contract in Tanapa and was already making plans for a small school at Silvercreek. Xavier's legal victory had sparked changes throughout the territory, a formal investigation into banking practices, new protections for landowners, and even Blackwood's eventual arrest on charges of extortion. "What are you thinking about?" Xavier asked, noting her contemplative expression. "Rivers," she replied, "how they can change course in an instant, carrying you to places you never expected to go." Xavier smiled, understanding her meaning. "Are you glad your river brought you here, to this life, to me?" Josephine turned in his arms, resting her hands on his chest as she looked up into the face of the man who had become her husband, her partner, her love. "I wouldn't change a single moment of it, not even nearly drowning, because without that, we might never have found each other." "I would have found you somehow," Xavier said with conviction. "Some things are simply meant to be." As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and purple, Josephine knew with absolute certainty that he was right. Their love story had begun in turbulent waters, but here, in each other's arms, they had found exactly the calm they both had sought, a peace born not of stillness, but of moving through life's currents together, strong enough to weather whatever storms might come.